My father stood on the raised wooden deck, holding a crystal glass of scotch, his face twisted in disgust as he stared at the handcrafted velvet box I had just placed in his hands. Around us, 50 of the city's most influential figures, judges, real estate tycoons, and city council members, hushed their conversations. It was his retirement and farewell party, a lavish backyard affair lit by expensive fairy lights, catered by the finest chefs in the state. I had spent 6 exhausting months sourcing a rare vintage luxury timepiece for him. I even had the back meticulously inscribed, "To Dad, thank you for teaching me how to survive." My father looked down at the gleaming watch, then looked up at me. He didn't smile. He didn't pull me into a warm embrace. Instead, he chuckled, a cold, cruel sound that echoed across the manicured lawn. "Do you believe gifts purchase loyalty?" he asked, his voice ringing out clearly through the silence. "You'll always rank last." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. My stepmother smirked into her expensive wine glass. My half-brother, Marcus, standing beside him in a tailored bespoke suit, sneered openly. They fully expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for his approval in front of his peers, just like I had done as an ignored kid growing up in the shadow of his real family. Instead, I smiled. I reached out, took the open velvet box right out of his hand, snapped it shut with a sharp click, and slipped it into my trench coat pocket. Without saying a single word to him, I turned on my heel and began walking toward the front gate. "Elena, get back here right now!" My stepmother's frantic voice shouted after me. "You are embarrassing this family." I didn't stop. I kept walking into the cool night air, the heavy iron gate clicking shut behind me. By 7 a.m. the next morning, my phone was blowing up. Dozens of missed calls, endless frantic text messages from my father, my stepmother, and Marcus. "You selfish brat, return everything immediately. Do you have any idea what you've done? Answer your damn phone. You bring that back or we are cutting you off completely." They thought they were demanding the watch back. They thought I had just thrown a petty, childish temper tantrum. They had no idea what was actually coming. But to understand why my father felt so incredibly comfortable humiliating me in front of 50 powerful people, you have to understand how my life started. When I was 7 years old, my birth mother abandoned my father and me to pursue a new life overseas. A few years later, my father, Victor, remarried a wealthy heiress, and together they had my half-brother, Marcus. From that moment on, I became a ghost in my own home. Marcus got expensive private tutors, Ivy League trust funds, and a brand new European sports car for his 16th birthday. I got hand-me-downs, quiet corners in the library, and constant daily reminders that I was a financial burden. My father treated me like a second-class citizen, constantly telling me that I lacked the ambition, the pedigree, and the intellect to ever make something of myself in his world. "You're exactly like your mother," Victor would say whenever I brought home a report card with anything less than perfect marks. "Unreliable, weak, you'll always rank last." I learned early on that fighting back with words was completely pointless. Raising my voice only gave him ammunition to call me hysterical and unstable. So I adopted a strict, unbreakable rule for myself. Stay calm, stay silent, and build in secret. While Marcus coasted through college on our father's endless dime, partying his way to a failing GPA, I worked 3 separate jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and put myself through dual law and business degrees. When I finally graduated at the top of my class, my father didn't even bother to attend the ceremony. He was too busy hosting a yacht party for Marcus, who had just been handed a cushioned executive vice president position at my father's commercial real estate firm, Sterling Enterprises. I took an entry-level job at a firm across town. My father laughed out loud when he heard the news. "A grunt worker," he scoffed at Sunday dinner, cutting into his steak. "You'll be stuck in a cubicle for the rest of your life while Marcus runs the city." I just smiled and passed him the salt. Nobody in that room knew the truth. That entry-level firm wasn't a standard, run-of-the-mill law firm. It was an elite boutique forensic accounting and corporate compliance firm that specialized in high-stakes corporate acquisitions and white-collar fraud investigations. And I wasn't just a grunt employee for very long. Within 4 grueling years, through relentless 80-hour work weeks and strategic investments, I became a junior partner. 6 months before my father's retirement party, our firm was quietly hired by an international private equity conglomerate called Vanguard Partners. Vanguard was executing a massive stealth buyout of Sterling Enterprises. My father was absolutely desperate to sell his company before his retirement to fund his lavish lifestyle, but he didn't know who the parent firm behind Vanguard Partners was. He thought he was dealing with an anonymous, faceless board of directors. In reality, as the lead compliance officer on the file, I held the master keys to the entire transaction. For months, I combed through Sterling Enterprises' financial records. What I found was an absolute minefield of illegal tax evasion, forged signatures, and millions in embezzled funds, all directly signed off by my brother Marcus and aggressively approved by my father. Over the years, my father's arrogance had reached monstrous proportions. He was a man who truly believed money bought absolute immunity. He cheated small contractors out of their hard-earned pay, leveraged highly illegal favors with local politicians, and treated his employees like dirt on his shoe. And Marcus was a chip off the old block. Marcus used company funds as his personal piggy bank, loudly bragging at family dinners about how he could write off extravagant nightclub tabs and luxury vacations as business expenses. "Power isn't given, Elena," my father bragged to me one evening over dinner, swirling his cognac in the dim light. "It's taken. People like you exist to build the world for people like me and Marcus." My stepmother nodded in agreement, dabbing her lips delicately with a cloth napkin. "It's just the natural order of things, dear. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to serve." I watched my father take a long sip of his drink. He was so confident, so entirely sure that his authority was absolute and unquestionable. What he failed to realize was that when you spend 20 years treating someone like they're invisible, they learn how to watch everything you do without ever being seen. 2 weeks before the farewell party, my father made a catastrophic mistake. He called me into his home office and slapped a thick legal document onto the mahogany desk. "I need you to sign this," he commanded, not even looking up from his laptop. I looked down at the paperwork. It was a waiver surrendering my tiny, non-voting heritage shares in the family estate, shares my late grandmother had left me to ensure I wasn't left completely destitute. "Marcus needs those shares pooled to clean up the equity portfolio for the Vanguard buyout," my father said casually. "Sign it." "And what do I get in return, Dad?" I asked quietly. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "In return, you get to keep calling yourself a Sterling. Isn't that enough? You've brought absolutely nothing to this family. Sign the paper." "I need time to review it," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You have 48 hours, he snapped angrily. "If you don't sign it, don't bother coming to my retirement party. Remember that detail. It matters later." Instead of signing it, I forwarded the document directly to my legal team. Tucked deeply into the fine print of page 40 was a highly illegal clause attempting to transfer massive personal corporate liabilities directly onto my name. They were actively trying to make me the legal scapegoat if the IRS ever audited the company. I didn't yell. I didn't confront him. I simply went out, purchased that rare luxury watch, and waited for the night of the party. When my father stood on that deck in front of 50 powerful guests and told me, "Do you believe gifts purchase loyalty? You'll always rank last," he thought he was putting me in my place one final time. He thought he was asserting his dominance. He didn't realize that I had brought that watch to give him one last, desperate chance to show a single shred of human decency, a single moment of warmth, and I might have quietly warned him about the devastating federal audit report sitting on my desk. Instead, he chose cruelty. This is where everything changed. When I snatched the watch box back, walked out the gate, and drove away into the night, I drove straight to my office. At 11:45 p.m., I sat down at my laptop, opened the Vanguard Partners file, and executed 2 final actions. First, I officially flagged Sterling Enterprises for systematic fraud, immediately freezing the multi-million-dollar buyout payout. Second, I authorized the immediate, automated delivery of a comprehensive, 300-page forensic audit directly to the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service. They had no idea what was coming. At 9 a.m. the following morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My father, my stepmother, and Marcus were calling relentlessly, demanding I return to the house to sign the share transfer documents and return the watch. They thought the sudden delay in their buyout payout was just a routine technical glitch. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked into the grand glass boardroom on the top floor of Sterling Enterprises headquarters. My father was sitting at the head of the long table, flanked by his high-priced lawyers, Marcus, and several high-ranking board members. When I opened the heavy glass door, my father's face flushed red with instant fury. "What are you doing here, Elena?" he barked, slamming his hand on the polished table. "This is a private executive board meeting. Get out before I have security throw you. Sit down, Victor, a calm, commanding voice cut in. Stepping out from behind me was the managing general partner of Vanguard Partners, along with 3 armed federal marshals and 2 lead auditors from the IRS. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Dropped pens clattered against the table. Shocked faces and pale expressions filled the room. My father's jaw dropped in sheer confusion. What is the meaning of this? I walked slowly to the head of the table, pulled out a heavy leather chair directly across from him, and sat down. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of finalized documents, and set them down with a heavy thud. Yesterday you told me I would always rank last, I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and deadly clear. You told me gifts don't buy loyalty. I reached into my coat, pulled out the velvet box containing the watch, and placed it gently on the table. You were right, I continued, leaning forward. Gifts don't buy loyalty, but ownership buys authority. Marcus's face turned ghostly pale. Elena, what are you talking about? I am the lead compliance director for Vanguard Partners, I said, looking my father dead in the eye. And as of 8 a.m. this morning, Vanguard has officially terminated the acquisition of Sterling Enterprises due to catastrophic, premeditated material fraud. The boardroom descended into absolute chaos. That's impossible, my father screamed, leaping to his feet, his face purple. You're a nobody. You work at a small-time firm. I own the firm, Dad, I replied calmly, and I have spent the last 6 months documenting every single dollar you and Marcus stole from this company. The lead IRS auditor stepped forward, placing a thick, stamped folder directly in front of my brother. Marcus Sterling, you are under formal investigation for wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, breathing heavily, his hands trembling violently as he stared at the federal crest on the folder. Victor Sterling, the federal marshal announced loudly over the commotion, a hard freeze has been placed on all personal and corporate assets affiliated with Sterling Enterprises, pending federal indictment. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with unadulterated horror, his lips trembling. The invincible, arrogant man who had spent 20 years tormenting me was suddenly shrinking before my very eyes. Elena, please, he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. We're family. You can't do this to your own family. Family? I asked quietly, standing up and buttoning my coat with complete dignity. Family doesn't leave you last. I didn't yell. I didn't celebrate wildly. I simply picked up the velvet box containing the luxury timepiece, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked out of the boardroom. Behind me, I could hear my father screaming my name, begging for mercy, while Marcus quietly wept as the federal marshals stepped forward with heavy steel handcuffs. As I rode the glass elevator down to the lobby, a deep, profound sense of peace washed over me. The heavy weight I had carried since I was an abandoned 7-year-old girl in an empty house was instantly gone. I didn't need their love. I didn't need their approval. I had built my own kingdom while they were busy looking down on me. 3 months later, the dust finally settled. Sterling Enterprises went into forced, immediate liquidation. The massive family mansion, the fleet of luxury cars, and the exclusive country club memberships were all seized by the government to pay back the stolen funds. Marcus pled guilty to wire fraud to avoid maximum prison time and was sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary. My father, entirely stripped of his wealth, his towering reputation, and his precious company, was forced to sell off his remaining personal belongings just to pay his mounting legal defense bills. He now lives in a modest, cramped, rented 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely ignored and shunned by the elite social circles he used to rule with an iron fist. My stepmother filed for a highly publicized divorce just 6 weeks after the indictment. As for me, I kept the watch. It sits proudly on my desk in my corner office overlooking the sprawling city skyline. Every morning when I sit down at my desk, I look at the inscription on the back. To Dad, thank you for teaching me how to survive. He thought he was teaching me that I was weak. In reality, he was teaching me exactly how to break him. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? Tell me your story in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more revenge stories every week.